Okay, to get started, let's look at some of the challenges we see with community problem solving today. So, with any geographically defined community, be it a town or a neighborhood, we like to ask the same important question, which is, are we flourishing together? And we look at flourishing as being made up of multiple different dimensions. Now, most places when we ask this question, we find that communities are not necessarily flourishing to their full potential, and in some cases, they may actually be suffering. And when this happens, people within those communities identify the problems and form nonprofits to do mission work to improve the problems that they see. Now, unfortunately, as the number of these nonprofits grows, they begin to focus more and more narrowly on specific problems to solve. And they can become a bit siloed in their specific missions and lose sight of the broader whole person and also the whole community perspective. So we end up with a bit of a fractured approach to solving what we believe are an interconnected set of problems. Now, another issue that arises is that the nonprofits are looking to the same or similar funding channels to support their work. So they may be speaking with the same individual investors, they may be applying for the same grants or approaching the same companies for philanthropy dollars. And many of the funders also are focused on a very specific set of issues that they want to have an impact on, and may not necessarily be working at the full system level or looking at the whole community as a system. So this can at times result in an unintended consequence of a scattergun approach to funding community problem solving and a scattergun approach to addressing the problems within the community themselves. Now, finally, most of these nonprofits rely solely on outside funding, and they don't have any revenue source of their own, which means that ultimately the dollars from those funding channels runs out, and the nonprofits need to keep going back to the funders and asking for more and more money. So when this happens in perpetuity, it creates this sort of never-ending cycle of funding with no real clear off-ramp. And a lot of people that we speak with are questioning whether or not this current economic setup of these nonprofits is sustainable in the long run. Now, we have a hypothesis that it is possible to support community flourishing in the long run in an economically sustainable way with a bit of different thinking. So what we're proposing is a generative local community experiment. And where this starts is first by building a network of what we refer to as generative local businesses. So we can break down what that means. A generative local business network is a network of businesses that are employee owned and run. They meet a local community need. They employ members of the local community, and they follow generative practices. And what we mean by generative practices is that the flourishing of employees and customers is of primary importance to these businesses, and it comes before maximizing profits. Now, of course, in order to do this, the businesses must still remain profitable to enable the work of enabling the flourishing. And there are great examples of businesses that do this today. They're financially self-sustaining while also empowering and supporting the well-being of all of those who are involved. So our hypothesis is that if we pull together a set of businesses like this together into a network, they can actually support each other and multiply the what we call flourishing on investment, or FOI, of these businesses. Now, a key question that we need to answer here is, how do we ensure that a generative local business network is using generative practices? And this is where we believe that a structure needs to be created that governs the network of businesses. And we call this a community-owned organization network operator, or CUNO for short. And a CUNO provides oversight to ensure the businesses are operating in a generative way. The CUNO also stewards the profits generated by the businesses and reinvests them back into the community to support the flourishing across multiple dimensions. So in this way, because the businesses are focused on flourishing and the CUNO is investing the profits from those businesses back into the community, we get a double impact on community well-being. Now, running the local business network would be very challenging, and so we need to understand how the Kuno would support the health and management of the businesses in the network. So here's one idea on how we could inject more cash into those businesses. Now, every community has what we call local anchor organizations, which are large and established systems with clear economic models, and they deliver services that meet important needs of the community. They are by nature local, and so they have a vested interest in the well-being of the communities in which they sit. Now, these local anchor organizations have their own supply chain needs, and oftentimes those needs are outsourced to large multinational corporations. So, for example, their laundry needs or their food service or their cleaning needs may be outsourced to companies like Sodexo, Cintas, or Cisco. And the cash that they use to purchase the services from these corporations translates from an economic standpoint into dollars leaving the local community and going to the corporate headquarters and shareholders of those large companies. So we believe that the current outsourcing practices of these anchor orgs weakens the community and ultimately their own customer base. So we think that the Kuno can play a role here by working with the local anchor organizations to say, hey, why don't we take a look at some of these contracts for your supply chain needs? And when they expire, maybe we can shift some of the relationships from the large multinational companies to the local businesses in the Generative network instead. So this would appeal to the hearts and minds of the leaders in the local anchor organizations and also their employees. And it would also reframe their supply chain needs, not just as costs, but also as opportunities to impact the well-being of the community. So this is the core economic cycle of the experiment that we're proposing. And so now let's go back to the funding channels. Instead of a continuous investment to prop up kind of an unsustainable cycle or system, now with this Generative Local Business Network, we're asking for a one-time investment. So that ask is to help build components or pieces of this economic engine, the business network. And once it's in place and once it's well managed, that business network will be self-sustaining. So we think that creating a system like this would over time more holistically improve the well-being of a community in an economically sustainable way, while also alleviating many of the challenges with the current approach to nonprofits and community problem solving that we see.